I would like now to introduce our speaker today. It's Seth Thompson. He's the Programs Director for the Freshwater Society. He joined Freshwater last January with a decade of experience designing and delivering programs that sit at the intersection of science and societal impact. He earned his PhD in limnology and oceanography in the Water Resource Sciences program at the University of Minnesota in 2019. He studied the links between phosphorus and carbon cycling in lake systems. Seth is passionate about connecting people with opportunities to improve the world around them and believes that science is a powerful tool for public good. He lives in Brooklyn Park with his wife and 2 sons and loves to spend time gardening, exploring local nature areas with his family, and engaging in an exciting evening of board games with the kids. And he's here today to tell us about the Freshwater Society. Please welcome Seth Thompson.
I'm going to, if that works out okay. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay.
Use the microphone.
Is this thing
It's
on?
not.
It's not working.
Okay, I'll talk really loud. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm Seth Thompson, Programs Director for Freshwater. Just a little bit about myself before I dive in. I grew up in western South Dakota in the Black Hills in Rapid City, and from a very young age was always drawn to the water. I spent a lot of time, I lived just outside of the city limits, and so I spent a lot of time putzing around in streams, catching crawdads, doing a lot of trout fishing in the Black Hills, and from a very young age knew that water was something that was really important to me. What I have since found out over the course of my life is that water is very important to all of us, and many of us are connected to water in our own ways. And so when I had the opportunity to join Freshwater in January as the programs director, it was really kind of the culmination of all of these different aspects of my life, both my care and commitment to protecting water, my scientific training as an aquatic scientist and understanding the fundamental science that's going on in water, and being able to really sit at the intersection of science-based impact in the world. And so I have a few slides today to just talk a little bit about what Freshwater is, who we are, what we work on. But I'm hoping to leave plenty of time too for conversation about Freshwater as an organization, my career path as a limnologist, any questions people have about water issues that they want to talk about. And so that's kind of, I tend to be a pretty informal presenter, so feel free to stop me and we can chat too. Is that fair? Awesome. So the mission of Freshwater is to inspire and empower people to value and protect water. And so I think there's a couple of really important parts about our mission that I always really like to highlight. And the first is that we are focused on people, right? So we are inspiring and empowering people. That means we do our work through relationship. We do our work by building partnerships, building relationships with other organizations, with volunteers, with scientists, with policymakers, with all sorts of different people in order to ultimately have the impact of protecting Minnesota's water resources. And so our work has really been grounded in a history that is a little bit unique for a nonprofit organization. So Freshwater was founded in 1968 in response to a citizen, Dick Gray, who lived on Lake Minnetonka and noticed that his water quality was degrading. He was starting to see algal blooms pop up in the spring and into the summer, and he was wondering, why is this happening, what's going on, and how do we make sure that we can protect the water so that me and my friends that live on the lake can continue to enjoy the benefits of that. And so in 1968, it was incorporated as the Freshwater Biological Research Foundation, and it was one of actually the first things that the College of Biological Sciences at the University of Minnesota did as a college. So they founded this research center. In 1974, they actually secured a building out in Navarre, right on Lake Minnetonka, where they ran a research lab all the way up until the late 90s. And so for about 25 years, they ran a research lab out there. And then through a whole host of different things, there was movement back and forth between the university and an independent nonprofit. Finally, we broke away from the University of Minnesota, or split away from the University of Minnesota, and now we exist as an independent nonprofit organization. We still have a very strong relationship with the College of Biological Sciences, but we are now a fully independent nonprofit in Minnesota. And so one of the things that I'll talk a little bit about today is our Minnesota Water Stewards program. That launched in 2013, and it really has become our foundational education and continuing education program that we run out of Freshwater. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we just recently celebrated a decade of programming in that program, and we're really excited to be evolving it and looking forward to really expanding it in the future. So that's kind of where we are organizationally. We have a small but mighty team, I would say, of 10 full-time employees currently. We cover a whole host of different technical expertise, from engineering to geology to my background as a limnologist. We also have folks with more marketing experience and government relations type experience, and a whole host of program staff that really help do the daily work of our program implementation. And so we have the joy of, when you have a small team, we all get to be involved in all the things. And it's been a really cool opportunity for me personally, because I spent the last 15 years at the University of Minnesota, which has a lot more than 10 employees. And so coming to a small nonprofit and really being able to see all the different aspects of how the organization works and be able to contribute to all those has been a pretty exciting opportunity for me. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our work. Our work is organized in a couple of different ways, but one of the things that is really consistent across all of our work is we are really uniquely positioned because of our mission to work across freshwater to be able to build these kind of multi-sector partnerships. So we are really good at working across all sorts of different sectors, bringing folks together from government, from local units of government, from nonprofit, from academia, from all these different places to really identify community-based issues in water and then create community-centered solutions that we can sustain over the long term. So that's what we really try to do at Freshwater, is how do we bring people together, how do we identify shared issues and then create shared solutions that can be durable and lasting to ensure that in the future, Minnesota continues to have swimmable and fishable water, as well as clean and accessible drinking water for everybody. We do this through kind of three big key focus areas. And so our focus areas are really safe and clean water for communities, as well as groundwater sustainability and restoration. And so something that a lot of folks might not know, about 75% of Minnesotans get their drinking water from groundwater sources. And so it is our main source of drinking water in the state. It is also largely tapped into for large water users. And so that can create some conflict, because if we're using groundwater for things like manufacturing, data centers, agricultural uses, right, that could potentially, depending on the situation, provide some direct conflict with accessibility to clean drinking water. And so we work a lot about how do we think about groundwater, how do we manage groundwater. One of the things that's really hard about groundwater is we can't see it. So we know how much surface water there is. We can measure that pretty easily. In Minnesota, we're actually pretty good. We've invested quite a bit of effort and time and money into having really good mapping of our groundwater. But even in Minnesota, we don't fully really understand how much groundwater there is, where exactly it is, and how can we use it in sustainable ways. So that's one of the things that we really work into. And then the other, very much tied into that, is this concept of water circularity. Has anyone heard the term water circularity before? So that's usually a pretty new term for folks. Water circularity is just the idea that we can reuse water oftentimes, rather than kind of a traditional take water out of a source, use it, and then discharge it to downstream. And so we do a lot of work in kind of how can you do water recycling, water reuse, other sort of water efficiency programs, so that we can get really good about using as little water as possible. And when we use water for things like manufacturing or other industrial uses, are there ways that we can actually use that water multiple times before, say, discharging it downstream? So these are kind of our big focus areas. How we do our work is through kind of three thrusts, I would say. The one that is really my bread and butter, the team that I'm most closely working with, is our education and engagement team. So this is our public education programs, our community engagement programs, our K-12 programming, all of that type of work. We also have our water research team. This is really about how do we generate new knowledge? How do we generate new knowledge about aquatic systems, about how people value aquatic systems and freshwater? And then our water policy team is how do we take that new knowledge and actually apply it in effective ways to create durable change and durable policy that can help protect Minnesota's resources. So these are kind of the three areas that we work across. So I'll give just a couple examples of some of our work. Here's our kind of policy and legislative work. Freshwater is very active at the Capitol during the legislative session. Each year, we produce a legislative agenda. One of the things that is really critical about Freshwater is we are not lobbyists, although we do pay some contract to lobbyists, and 2 of our staff members are registered lobbyists because they do a little bit of that work. But our core mission is in the advocacy space. And so we are very bipartisan in thinking about what does the best science tell us about the best approaches to achieve the water quality outcomes that we're looking for. And that's really what we do to inform our policy and advocacy issues. So we have our legislative agenda each year. Through that, we do all sorts of engagement with state agencies, legislators, all sorts of local units of government to try and help raise awareness, build knowledge around the key issues that people in Minnesota are facing with respect to their water. We generate a lot of that information about what are these key issues by just being out in community. How do we go out and learn from people across the state about what are the water issues that you're facing and what do we need to do about them? And so we do a lot of community engagement in education events. This can be hosting symposiums. We have a booth at the state fair that we just got done with and spent 12 days sitting at the booth at the state fair engaging with folks, participating in festivals or other sort of community engagement events, and really listening to folks about what issues do you have, how can we help build solutions for you. And so we love to do a lot of this work. This work is also very time intensive, and like I said, we're a pretty small staff, and so we don't necessarily get to do as much of this as we ultimately would love to do, but we're really excited to take advantage of the opportunities that we can. Then kind of where my main wheelhouse is, and where I have spent most of my time since January really thinking about our work, is in our programs and projects space. And this is where we're, once we've kind of identified an issue, once we're working towards some solution, we go out and try to find ways, how do we actually address this? How do we, do some kind of policy initiative? How do we build an education program? Is there a question that we just need to fundamentally better understand? In which case, can we create partnerships to explore research opportunities? And we've worked on these sorts of things across all sorts of different places. So for example, we have a teacher field school. This is work that's primarily funded by the LCCMR, so Minnesota's Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources. That's the group responsible for administering the Environmental Trust Fund dollars. And through a partnership with Hamline University, we work with teachers who are trying to think about how to do nature-based learning. So how do they bring their students, elementary age students, out into nature to really do all of their lessons, whether it be math, science, language arts, in these kind of nature-based ways. So that's one example. We are very involved in creating the state drinking water plan. We've got water workforce pathways where we go out and talk with students about ways that they can get involved in the water workforce. One of the things that's really interesting about the water workforce is that we are all incredibly dependent upon it, but they're largely jobs that we don't see, right? And so I can go back to that tap and turn it on and fill my cup up and drink it, and I take that for granted, right? I just assume that that's the case here in Minnesota, and largely that's true at most places in the US. But what we don't always think about is that there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before the water comes out of that tap that requires wastewater treatment operators. It requires natural resource protection folks who are working in protecting source waters. There's a whole host of folks from treatment, delivery, maintenance, all of these things that go into sustaining our water infrastructure. And how many of you, when you were growing up and your 5th grade teacher said, what do you want to do when you grow up? Said, I want to be a wastewater auditor. That was probably not the career that came to mind, right? Yet it's an incredibly vital one. And so a lot of the water workforce lacks basic awareness of these career opportunities. There's a lot of folks who don't understand that there are really good, well-paying jobs supporting water infrastructure, but we don't talk about them. And when we don't talk about them, it's hard to get students to enroll in those training programs. It's hard to get folks to think about those career options. And so we're trying to do a lot of work around how do we raise awareness about the water workforce, because much like many other industries, we're facing a demographic shift in water. And we have a large number of retirements coming with very few people exploring those careers from an incoming talent perspective. We also help organize the Minnesota delegation to the One Water Summit. This is a big national convening of water professionals that really talk about how do we shift our mindset from thinking about water as this chopped up, siloed space where we think about, well, we've got the Department of Natural Resources, and then we've got the Department of Health that does some water stuff, and then we've got local watershed districts, and then we've got cities that are doing treatment. And instead, how do we think about water as one unified space? Because at the end of the day, there's only so much available, and we can't make more of it, right? The water is the water, and no matter what we do with it, there isn't any way that we can kind of create more. And so this effort has really been thinking about how do we think about water more holistically across all these different sectors, because anything we do in one space has big impacts on the other spaces. We've done a whole host of other kind of research-based programs and research-based projects. And then the one that's really near and dear to my heart, which I'm going to talk a little bit about now, is our Minnesota Water Stewards program. So Minnesota Water Stewards is our cornerstone continuing education program. It is probably our best way to support people who are really interested in asking the question, how do I build my skills and knowledge to help support clean water? How many people have heard of master gardeners, master naturalists, right? Okay, Minnesota Water Stewards, very similar program model with an emphasis on water stewardship. One of the things that I'm really excited about is that, after reflecting on 10 years of programming, we made a decision to try to take Minnesota Water Stewards and put it into a program structure that is a bit more scalable. And so we now are going to be doing some more hybrid offerings, things that combine some online learning with some in-person experiences, with the goal of really expanding our reach across the state over the next 3 years. Minnesota Water Stewards has historically been a pretty Twin Cities metro-focused program. Not entirely, we've done work in Rochester and other places too. But this is a really unique opportunity to support people. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is because we've been successful in securing some initial funding partnerships with some foundations and watershed districts and other partners. We're going to be able to offer the 2026 programming free of charge to anyone who wants to participate. And so participants will not be asked to pay their tuition for the Minnesota Water Stewards program as we launch it statewide in 2026. And so that's kind of a big high-end overview of what we've got going on at Freshwater. And I'd love to just take some time. If folks have questions or anything about Freshwater, I'm happy to chat about it now. So thank you so much for the time, and I'm excited to converse.
Yeah. You were talking about circularity.
Yeah.
Somebody told me that it's a better thing to take your car to the car wash than to wash it in your driveway. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, that's a great question. So, I haven't thought about that particular example, but here's a couple of reasons I think that I would agree with that. When you think about a car wash setup, that infrastructure has been built in to manage that water discharge, right? They built that place knowing that we're going to have water discharge and it's being diverted or it's being managed in some way. When you think about most residential spaces, if you're washing your car in your driveway, for example, the discharge, all that water is just going into the standard stormwater system. And most of our stormwater infrastructure is honestly not great. Depending on where you are, it could be as little stormwater management as just being directly discharged into a water body. So for example, if you live near the Mississippi River, a lot of those stormwater drains just drain right into the Mississippi. And so I'm guessing, that's probably the kind of the underlying sentiment around the idea of, that using a system that was built to manage some of that outflow versus dumping it into a municipal stormwater system. What the way that I might think about that question a little bit more is just thinking about, are there ways for you to wash your vehicle that fundamentally use less water or create less outflow from your driveway? So, like, there are waterless car wash solutions, for example. It's a little bit more scrubbing work, but I use those mostly in the winter because water freezes. So there are things like that. But yeah, that's kind of
Does climate change have an impact on freshwater at all?
Yeah, climate change has a huge impact on our freshwater systems. It was much of my graduate work focused on the intersections of climate and water. Climate is having huge impacts on water's ability to act as what we call a carbon sink. So when I talk about a carbon sink, that means that the ability for water to take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, lakes to take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So as water heats up and warms up, it can't hold gas as well. So that's one example. It's having a huge impact on our ice. So that's probably the most noticeable example for many Minnesotans is ice fishing seasons are getting shorter. Places where you used to be able to reliably ice fish are getting a lot harder to ice fish. And the lack of ice cover has really important implications for water levels as well. Because when a lake freezes, it basically puts a lid on it. It's really hard. The water below the ice doesn't evaporate over the winter. And so it keeps the water level relatively high through the winter. But when you don't get ice or you get less ice, you get more evaporation happening over the winter, and that draws down water levels, which can do things like concentrate nutrients, create less habitat for fish, and cause all sorts of problems. So climate is a big issue for our natural systems. It's also a huge issue for our built systems because, for example, we're seeing a lot more flooding, precipitation. Even if kind of our annual averages aren't changing as much, how that precipitation comes is changing quite a bit. We're having a lot more heavy rain events and then extended periods of drought. And that's not how we built our infrastructure to handle those things. And so we're seeing more things like flooding and those sorts of things too. Yeah.
When we look at like algae blooms and lakes, what's the solution to that?
That's a great question. So from a basic science perspective, fundamental science, algae blooms are driven by basically two things. Nutrients, so algae are plants. So this is just like gardening, right? It's nutrients and temperature, right? So assuming that we're not getting any massive changes in sunlight, because that's not how the sun works. So if we assume light availability kind of stays the same over time. As things get warmer, algae will grow faster. And when we get nutrients in the water from things like fertilizers we put on our lawn that then run off into the water, that's just free plant food for the algae to grow, right? And so ultimately solving the issue of algal blooms, really to do that effectively, we have to get the nutrients out of the water. That's easier to do in some cases when we know exactly where the nutrients are coming from. So that's what we call point source pollution. So if we, think of point source as like, I've got a lake and there's a stormwater pipe and a bunch of water comes through that pipe and it brings with it a bunch of phosphorus. Well, I can do some things at that pipe to take the phosphorus out of the water. That's point source pollution. The other time is non-point source pollution. And that's for things that come from the atmosphere. So like mercury, not related to eutrophication, but mercury is a great example of a non-point source pollutant. We got a bunch of mercury in our lakes because it rained. So during the Industrial Revolution, as we started to burn more and more fossil fuels, that put a lot of mercury into the atmosphere. That mercury comes out in rain and falls on the landscape. That's much harder to manage. And so like nitrogen, there are other nitrogen and phosphorus can come from both point and non-point source situations, but ultimately getting those out of the water is really the only way to sustainably manage eutrophication. Yeah.
I want to hear your take on with the growth of AI and its dependency on water.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's any regulations in place that protect water sources for the communities that need them, or what's your take on the whole AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say, just as a little bit of an anecdote, when I started at Freshwater in January, they were just kind of starting the launch of their, really doing their intensive legislative engagement. And we had a legislative agenda that had been crafted, that had a bunch of different stuff. None of the things on that legislative agenda were data centers, which is the crux of this AI issue, right? So we have the explosion of AI, you need these data centers to process that. They're very water intensive. By the end of the legislative session, probably 95% of what we were talking about was data centers. It became the major topic in water at the legislature last year. They're very water intensive. We don't have great regulation in how to how to do that effectively. We do have a set of guiding principles that we are encouraging municipalities and other local government units to ask as they're being approached about putting in a data center, to think about, do we really have the water to do this sustainably? I think ultimately, I don't think AI is going away, but I do think we need to get a lot more strategic about how we think about where we put data centers. Fundamentally, putting them on groundwater systems is just a bad idea. Surface water is a much more sustainable use, or finding other cooling operations. That's where most of the water goes, is in cooling. So
Could we ask AI to find other cooling sources for it?
that's a great question. I'm not an AI expert.
We're really going down a rabbit
I
hole.
know.
We are at our time. Can you stick around for more questions?
I
If
can,
anyone
yeah, I
else
can stay for a couple.
has any more further questions?
Yeah.
Well, so thank you. For some
Thank
note
you.
cards with
Yes.
seeds of Golden Valley.
This is
Thank you for your time. Fascinating
You bet.
presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was great.